It's the jump off. It's the jump off. It's the kick off party. We kicking it up. Kicking it up right now. This is the start of John T. Monsieur John T. teaches maths. So but we ain't gonna do maths. Finna do that on another date. But before all that start, I want to kick it off with a little history. But I've been teaching history, and I made the mistake of coming at it like I was preaching. I was always thinking I was going to come out here preaching, but not teaching. Warning, not showing. But on the real, though, I can't lie. It's kind of like one of those liar things. It's just some problem I have where I can't lie. So I was going to lie to you, but I had to tell the truth. I was going to fill you full of encouragement, hope, and wonder, and everything like that. But I can't lie, and because I don't see something really deep in terms of spiritual. I can see spiritual in terms of spiritual meaning in the text, but I can have my own kind of spiritual experiences, but I can't say here's the formula for some profound out of the world experience. That's just not what I can do. I'm not capable of that in any shape or fashion. But I do want to teach. I always want to teach, but I can't teach Bible because there's a lot of responsibility in there. And honestly, my personal belief is that it comes down to faith. That the empty tomb is supposed to be vague. We're never going to really know. And it's not about knowing in the first place, because if it was knowing, it wouldn't be believing. So it's true hearing, but it's not hearing facts. It's hearing about the good news, and the good news is not going to be something that could be seen. Comes out with observation. But without any further ado, I just want to talk about history. And let me start all the way from Adam and Eve. And I can't lie, remember, so y'all are going to like this. But I think Adam and Eve is not the story of the first man and woman, but the story of the first bit of a new culture. Let's call them Sumerians. And these Sumerians, I want to say, come from basically Scythians, or was like called Tartars. And the Tartars.
Peace.
Excuse me.
Peace, love, and blessings to mother's blood.
That's my fan fave. Excuse me. So you heard like tartar sauce, they might have been the first to domesticate animals. So things in tartar sauce, beyond the pickles, you'd have like maybe some eggs or milk or something. And they had domesticated animals. I don't know if they had chickens. Probably they had chickens, but chickens is a little different because I think they would let them run around the wild, but the chicken wouldn't go too far because the best kernels was right around the village or whatever. But the villages were probably pretty small because the land that they're from was really cold. And this was a big problem for the longest time. Trees don't really grow, and it's hard to farm because it's so cold. So what they did do is they did some hunting, but even that's pretty tough, and that ends up having a pretty patriarchal society in and of itself, because the breadwinner isn't really bringing home the bacon. He's bringing home the bacon or whatever. So it caused some unevenness. But this started changing over time with the advent of metal. Not only did they get the farming, but they was able to get chariots, so they was able to move their whole families on wagons and everything. And this is before anything in the Bible. This is a few thousand BC at least, and they had domesticated animals like goats and cows and everything. And this is way up by like the Don and Danube rivers, way up in Russia, and then the rivers downriver was to the North Pole, and they would be revolutionizing their society with the domestication of one particular animal, which is the horse. And the horse is still, a vestige that we see of that to begin with. In fact, most white people come from these kind of Neanderthals. This is where green eyes come from. It has something to do. You can see the wolves and everything that come in the tundra have green eyes. It has something to do with the low lights to reflect it or something. And they kind of got like wide cheekbones and stuff and eyebrows and stuff that they got like kind of squinty eyes and everything but they're not like necessarily like people south of the Great Wall of China kind of look or nothing, but just a little bit of a closing off that can block from the sun, big eyebrows and stuff like that, kind of like Neanderthals or flatheads, and they weren't known for their civilizations really. They were more known for traveling large swaths of land. They were bowmen. They had these composite bows made out of sinews and bones and wood, um, yew trees or something, and they could run circles around their enemies in their villages, firing arrows, and I bet it freak a lot of people out if they came down the mountain or from another land and they look a little different, and here they are riding on horses. And I think they went ahead and put even like ram's horn on their horses to make them even look freakier. And they riding on top of them. That probably looked like insane from the jump. Like that, like just people that hadn't even thought of that or even imagined it feasible. That probably looked kind of like when Hannibal came with his elephants, or the Seleucids came with his elephants. It was just kind of like out of this world to probably a lot of people's minds. And I mean, you can think a little bit of Genghis Khan, because it was similar kind of area and a similar kind of tactics, but much later was Genghis Khan, thousands of years later. And this is actually where we get a lot of Western culture, like European culture. I don't know if it was before this or after this, but because the runes and everybody, runic language is about the only kind of form of language, written language they had. The runic script, and that was pretty far and few between, and pretty late at that. So we don't really have much European history of the North. They were basically considered barbarians, and so even if their language was Indo-European and not necessarily Semitic, it's hard to explain this to y'all, but it has a lot to do with the Shepherd Kings. And the Shepherd Kings went down to Egypt, and I did a video about Yayu and the Semitic kings of Egypt. But this has a lot to do with like the Hyksos and the Shasu and a particular period, kind of in the second millennium BC, and this was a different language group. Like Sargon, the Semitic language, I think, has to do with adopting the languages of the people of the land that they went to. And they were kind of sold downriver in a lot of ways, and you can think of there are numerous examples of colonizers. Like let's say a German guy went to China to do business. He was in Beijing or Shanghai or Hong Kong or something. And here this man is writing in Chinese, speaking in Chinese, and that's incredibly remarkable. I could never learn Chinese. That seemed like really hard to do, but I bet I could if I spent enough years. And this guy is a remarkable guy nonetheless. That he probably spent lots of years. It was probably part of an important business decision that a bunch of people made and put a lot of time and effort into, so that this guy is like speaking Chinese. So if y'all look at Isaiah 19, it says, verse 16, in a day shall Egypt be like unto one woman, and it shall tremble in fear because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which is shaking over it. And the land of Judah shall become a terror unto Egypt. Whosoever one maketh mention thereof of it shall be afraid, because of this purpose of the Lord of hosts, which he purposed against it. In the day there shall be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Lord of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction. So after the Judean armies would conquer Egypt in this prophecy, they're speaking the language of Canaan, and the Lord of hosts is their God. And this is like we see with the Edomians. The Edomians eventually fell under the law and got grafted into the nation various times, namely under King David and his general Joab, or something like that. And that's reminiscent of the Messianic era. Because Jacob couldn't admit to it. Jacob, what he do? He supposedly wrestled with God after getting the blessing, after getting the birthright. Wrestled with God, and so now he's got God's blessing. He's still feigning obedience to Esau, servitude. He's still Esau, I'll show you. And Jacob's messengers before him to Esau, and the command saying, thus say unto my Lord Esau, my Lord. So Jacob's Lord, he say, is Esau. Thus saith thy servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban in Aram. Aram. Does that mean like cunning? So, Jacob was kind of cunning, and his uncle was kind of cunning, and they're trying to trick each other, and Jacob came out ahead or something. But we came to thy brother Esau. Anyway, I approved it. He said servant and everything, so he's feigning this kind of obedience. And it's like this today in Hebrew. Like when you go to translate Google and type in different kinds of nationalities, Jordanian, German, when it's somebody who they want to paint as the new Esau in modern parlance, it was different back in the day, back when merchandise down the Silk Road was going good with the Saracens, and the Saracens really liked them because they could get around rules in usury and stuff like that. And while there was the Catholic Church with their kind of replacement theology. It was just kind of different. And so with the creation of the new state coming directly smack dab in the middle of Arab nationalism and being kind of a zero-sum game in there, they got a new Esau. No longer is it Christian Europe. No longer is Canaan, because there's some similarities between Ishmael and Canaan and Canaanites and Esau. They try to paint with kind of a broad brushstroke to kind of conflate these people as being more primitive, more hairy, less pure. They married foreign women and they didn't quite have the same religious customs, and they want to live with Sodom and Gomorrah and all kinds of stuff. And you can even when you start talking about Arabs in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, it's no longer like with Exodus where are kind of welcomed in the group. They're kind of trying to cause rift, and we know Ezra and Nehemiah definitely caused a rift. Nehemiah 13:3, I think it was, where they had gave them a little boot. I don't know who didn't give Boaz the boot, but that's something people miss altogether. The conservative Confucian order of Israel is not how David and all them got in. This is not the narrative of Judges with Samson and everything. The Melchizedek and Nazarite priesthoods are workarounds. That it's not the conservative order of the past. It's a little bit different. And nobody tell you that. Nobody tell you that. But they kind of dig their own ditch, as it says in Psalm 76, that they just kind of, or I can't remember what song it was, but, when they try to make themselves preeminent and go back to before Israel, they end up shooting themselves in the foot because you end up having, something that pre-exists the law. A lot of what they when they go back to Abraham is what they do is they pre-exist the law, and that's what they do with the term Hebrew. The word Hebrew is trying to be this preeminent word, but when there's no word Hebrew in the Bible, like in terms of a language. In the New Testament there is, but most scholars will tell you that means Aramaic. And in Genesis and what have you, there's the term the Hebrew. They're talking about a specific person. They're talking about Abraham, like some kind of Tigger. He's the only one. And this ahead or Yehed or whatever. I don't even know this beloved one, my only son or whatever, like Isaac, they're laughing about. No, I don't laugh. This one, this beloved one, this beloved son, is one, the only one, and it's almost God coming out and taking part in society, but he's taking a partial part. He's being partial. He's posting up in Bethel. You're gonna tell Jacob build an altar, and in Luke 16 and in numerous other places, especially Proverbs and stuff, wisdom has something to do with being cunning and crafty, playing your cards right. Aram, like the serpent in the wilderness, the serpent in the garden, rather. The serpent in the wilderness is the one that bit him, but the serpent in the wilderness is that destroying angel that went and hit Israel when judgment came on his own house. But that generation all perish. That's besides the point. But this wisdom come, but they didn't want to listen to Moses, and that's why they got bit by the serpent. And they want, just like what happened to the firstborn of the Egyptians, so to speak. But you gotta excuse me because I'm kind of free willing. I got no notes. But in Isaiah, you got this fire serpents that are around the throne of the Most High. They these are called the seraphim, and this partial part that God has in the world is for His only Son, His unique Son, or whatever, and He's going to show up as this second power of heaven, going against Elohim in Genesis 3, Genesis 22, Numbers 22. And you have all these cases where Elohim's saying one thing, and then this angel of the Lord, comes in and as an intercessor for the blessing to bestow on a person. So he's got this kind of deal he's working with. I mean, this happens in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah, it seemed like it's a good candidate for being added to the base Babylonian ancient portion. This was an add-on, and from after exile and everything, to distance themselves from the Arabs. And this is what happened to Hagar and Ishmael. But this all happened before Islam and everything, So Islam was able to play on that. Not talking about Arabs. Let me clear that up real quick. People will conflate Muslims with Ishmaelites, and nothing could be farther from the truth. That is really, really dumb. Really dumb. And I mean, there are all kinds of Muslims that are Chinese and Malay and all kinds of things. Indians and all kinds of things. And not even all Arabs were Ishmaelites, because when you look at Exodus, there was a mixed multitude that came back with Moses and the children of Israel, but Ishmael didn't go into Egypt. And not only is not all Israel, but you have people like those mixed multitudes that is coming up with Israel. And you have people like Jethro, who's teaching the Lord of the Israelites, the Moses, his religion. He's doing sacrifices on his own. So, I mean, they probably had a closer connection to the nomads in the desert, probably via one of their spice routes, than they did. And this is how merchant culture. I mean, these Tatar people, they was merchandising kind of people, because one, they had access to the Silk Road, and they didn't have very good land for growing crops and fruits and stuff like that. So coincidentally enough, that worked out good for the Arabian Desert too. In the Arabian Desert, they could like the way they covered themselves from the cold worked pretty good for the sand and the sun. They didn't have as many layers around their body, but the head wrappings and the belts and the robes and stuff and the fasteners and everything else worked pretty good. And so they had posted up in the desert. That was the safe spot. I mean, it continued to be the safe spot. This is why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls to begin with. This is why the last stand was at Masada in the Jewish Roman War, because that it ends up being a way to, because you end up regressing so far into a mountainous, stony land and in a rain desert, in a rain cloud, a rain shadow. I mean, you ain't get no rain, and it ends up not having much purpose keeping it around, because it's not really going to be good for you to you know you can't, especially in culture that you're going to bury bodies and you can't have a profane fire. You're limited on how you're going to dispose of these bodies. I mean, how many tombs you got? If a person gets a whole cave, and this is an ancient society of millions of years, it's no wonder that these places become necropolises over time. And we see it today. We see similarities in and around the area betwixt Jerusalem and Arabia, and there's not much there. And in these areas, they had built these little cave dwellings out of stones, but over time they became tombs, and now they're abandoned. But there's a lot of respect for the dead bodies. You can see this in John 11 when they had to get the, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of Luke 12 or something with the spices for Lazarus or something, but I don't know. But they would bury them with their things and everything. But I'm not that far in the story. Let me back it up to Egypt and Joseph, and coming out there. Not like I had said, there was no Ishmael in Egypt. There was no Esau. There was no there's no Jethro. They were just people that was out in the what you call that, in the desert, or I mean it was in Goshen or whatever, and it became identity in and of itself, and something to do with the whole coming up out there and being in the desert. Both became part of a whole narrative, but nonetheless, in a people that was nomadic, pastoral nomadism, coincidentally enough, is the same culture heading of the Tartars and the Scythians, and these people that I'm theorizing predate the Akkadians. And if people want to delineate that, these can't be the same people, because like Dr. Brown will say, well, could it be Hittite? They couldn't be Hittites because they spoke Semitic, and Hittites are Indo-European. I'm trying to. That's why I brought out Isaiah 19, because just because you speak the language of Canaan, and that should dispel any notion that Moses was raised in Hebrew and his mother was nursing him, and he didn't learn the wicked ways of Egypt, and then God wrote in the holy ancient tongue with his own finger. And this is the language of angels, and it sounds like someone's hacking up a loogie. I hope it's not the language of angels, but as soon as there's no word, the Hebrew actually means the Eber, Eber, Eber. There's a person named Eber. You can't say the Eber. So Aber is the same vowel as when you say Obed, Obed-Edom, Obed. And like in the movie Aladdin, most people don't get this vowel right. Maybe like the Pakistani girl doesn't really use this letter as much as an Arab person would, but the word Ali, when you go Prince Ali, it's not Prince Ali, Ali. It's not like a nice sound. It's like that kind of hacking out sound. I can't do it really, but it's Ali, Ali, Ali. You have to kind of Ali. You got to kind of like suck in a little bit and pause. It's kind of like guttural and frictal. It's a really terrible sound. When you listen to Arabic recitation, you can really point out when there's an ayin, because it just like really just draws back from. And when they write it, it actually curves the opposite direction as the other letters. So it's quite opposite in that way. But we don't have the equivalent, you know. We don't have the equivalent of ayin, but Hebrew's got it. They don't have nearly as many letters, so we don't have this ayin letter. But Hebrew doesn't have a lot of other letters that Arabic has. Arabic has quite a lot more letters than all of them combined. And this has to do with a few things. One, kind of like what I was saying, the being the mixed multitude that are not necessarily Ishmaelites, that had been closely related or marginally connected or tangentially related to Abraham in some kind of way. I mean, I know I just said not Ishmael, but there is a story of Abraham and Ishmael, but nonetheless that's didactic. But I mean, there are people in the Arabian Desert long before Abraham, and but there is something that happened a long time before, or there was written language of these people, these green-eyed people, going down to Arabia. And I don't know why they chose particular areas, but like Mecca, I guess, was really nice. They put a lot of religious meaning into the idea of Mecca and how that relates to Ishmael and Hagar. And honestly, I kind of like the Islamic interpretation better than the biblical one, because I don't really think child abandonment is very good. I mean, I don't know how Sarah got him to abandon his child, but Abraham was a scary dude. He would let people lie down with his wife because he's afraid they would hurt him. And when his wife started talking, oh, I don't want your child sharing with my child or this and that, he's going to go abandon his child and everything. And I don't know, don't seem right to me. But that's what I say. And so you have this mixed multitude down in the desert, and I don't know when it comes to the Syrian Arabian desert how y'all gonna draw these lines. I don't know how you draw a line between Iraq and Syria. I know they end up doing it now and then even, but it wasn't a strong line. It was a rough line because it's in between a desert. Just like when they draw lines over an ocean, they I mean, they're kind of arbitrary because you ain't gonna have like it ain't gonna be like a battle line or anything. It's not like there's a chasm right in the middle of the ocean or nothing. And so a lot of these people like Sam, he's got such hatred. I don't know if in his country he's a persecuted minority, and I just sound like a real jerk to even mention it. Maybe he's got so many hard feelings and he's just feeling such a strong kind of way from some past hurt. Hurt people, but he's on a rampage, just flexing on the camera. You see he's always like, he starts his videos like this, and it's obviously like a little guy syndrome. You can tell he's only like 5 foot tall or something, which is perfectly fine. That's like normal for Persian people, but Iranian people are historically like kind of like Gulliver's Travels kind of Eloy kind of people or whatever. But you can even see this in Sennacherib's relief, that the Hebrews were getting filleted, and the Syrian soldiers were able to like hold them up, just like and fricassee them, just by their legs or something. And but you're probably wondering, well, John, how come you saying Assyrians is not the people, when you got this whole narrative? Well, what I'm saying is that there's all these different waves of people that came down, and that the ones that did come down, you know, even though Hebrew is closely related to Aramaic, they was playing off each other. Hebrew don't went down to Egypt and learned from there, and there was a force, and you have cuneiform in the east, and then you have in the middle, just kind of in the middle, and they was learning from each other, and there wasn't. And being in the middle, you would have a little bit of influence from both, not neither. You wouldn't have less influence from other people being in the middle. You'd be more influenced by other cultures, but they always want to use this kind of Old Testament belief of us versus them. There's the pure people within the walls, and then the impure people outside the walls. And this kind of hit a fever pitch in the completely unbelievable idea that 200 or 185,000 Neo-Assyrian troops died outside of the temple in the days of Hezekiah. Now, Sennacherib does corroborate the name Hezekiah, and honestly, I do think that the Bible is remarkable in that there is a lot of history in there. It's almost as if they was sitting up in Nineveh and Babylon and various other places and able to look at these steles, or be in a culture that was influenced enough by these steles that was normal knowledge amongst the people. And because of a vague omission of words regarding his fate, using such strong language that you could assume, because it wasn't ever explicitly said, they take this idea that because it's not said, it's not true, and they absolutely run with it to the point where in an area where very hard to bury people because the ground's so hard and their fire too sacred for nasty old heathens, I don't know how they would go about. I mean, there probably would be a valley of dry bones, but I don't know how they would dispose of these hundreds of thousands of bodies. But the battles in general were of biblical proportions. I mean, you see battles from like Muhammad's day are a few hundred people. That movie like 300, But some of like the Israelite armies were like 500,000, just marching through the desert. No, they feed them, don't worry, it's growing on the ground. Just pick it up. And but if you was traveling all this distance, you wouldn't have no leaven, no salt. Salt's really heavy. Leaven might seem kind of frivolous or bougie, and they wouldn't have too much of these kind of things. And but what they do is they make a mistake of is they conflate their culture with their prosperity. That the Shasu, the Tatars, the Scythians, all these different ways of immigrants into the Holy Land from the steeps past the Caucasus Mountains and around the Iranian mountains. When these people came down and around, they had implements that gave them superiority complex. They had writing system of accountancy. They had weapons of war, weapons of farming, all these different kind of things. It was prolific in metallurgy and husbandry. It was riding on horses and everything. And their culture was just able to go gangbusters on the Semitic Canaanite people that they took over. And they put this whole religious system around it, such as the Passover, that because it wasn't their land, they was going to be blessed nonetheless and get in. And this is this continuing idea that Malik Yahweh is posted up in Bethel, and he's partial, and he's working with Jacob, and they're conspiring against the people that was already there. That was too hairy, and they was going to, even though they marginally related to them in DNA, they're now taking on this settled culture when they had opposed the Tower of Babel and all other kinds of settlements. Particularly getting real sensitive by the time of the Greeks, because I mean their their accomplishments paled, no pun intended, compared to the Greeks. The Greeks would go into Asia and build wonders like they'd never seen, and so they had to get real sensitive and talk about the futility of buildings and how weak they were, and some of which exist today. They're thousands of years old and still there today. The ones that the Eastern people didn't get all bent out of shape and try to destroy, and but they had confused their prosperity. Their prosperity had a lot to do with their war tactics and their horsemanship and their cavalries, and they want you to think it's their cavalries. That they they had went through it and been purified, and therefore they deserve it. They're getting blessed because they're better and smarter and pure, and so they're going to eat the Canaanites, as it says in Numbers 15. They're going to eat Haman's ear, like they do when they celebrate what happened to Esther. So they all about eating the goat, eating the lamb, and they would raise them up to be eaten. That's what husbandmen do. They domesticate, and they try to confine and enclose and all that. And that's how they end up treating their wives too, with these rigid purity standards. So they'd have these little villages where the women's would live, and they could sustain themselves with what the men would bring back. But as it got harder, and they had to go farther, I mean, the dude could get lost, or he might be on his hunt for a long time on end. And so they did end up picking up some sedentary practices in land, So even though they was nomadic in nature, and they carry that into the desert, into the wilderness, the midbar, and what have you, they end up picking up a sedentary land, and this kind of really we start to see in the temple period, and this is where we start to see a lot about Messiah and the king and everything else, and the prophet system and everything else. But they're gonna point to little things along the way. I had done a video before where Sarug, I'm saying, is Sargon, like that. They're going to give you a little bit of history. There's some truth to the flood when it comes to how Kuwait, used to be bigger before the ice caps melt, or they're going to tell you about this replacement theology where the Canaanians was replaced and everything by God's providence and blessings and everything. And so there's going to be a little bit of truth in as much as there was a replacement that went ahead and they did, but what ended up not being true was that it was good or that God sanctioned it, but when you read the biblical text, that's how it read. And even though I'm trying to explain it's Asiatics, the racial undertones has caused all kinds of confusion. Where people who are non-Asiatics is thinking it means some kind of preference, and blessings of providence to them, and you can't blame them because all those racial undertones. The Genesis is almost nothing but racial undertones. It's like the whole point of the book almost. I can't lie. I mean, it's a lot more. So I was lying a little bit. The whole story about Dina and everything. What was that about? But I just want to talk more about the word Hebrew. There is no word Hebrew because he means the. So you can't say, you can use it Hebrew or Abru or Iabru. It's Abru. But this is true for Arabic. This is the same letter, the ayin, the I in Arabic, and biblically too. That's the only letter that makes it different than many in both Arabic and Hebrew. In Hebrew and Arabic, that I think Reb means many, and it means Lord in a sense too. So when you read, like, especially Arabic, when you see the word the many, it's speaking of God, because God, like, even when you go back to Old Testament, is plural. It's Elohim. It's the council. It's the hosts. He's the El Elyon is the Lord of hosts, of armies. And so Arab is, it's not Arab. It's not. It's Ayin Ra Be Ba A Ra Ba Arab. And this is the same word that they use for mixed fabrics. It refers to multiplicity, and this is what happened in the Arabian desert. You have Egyptians, Kushis, you have Asiatics, you have these different people that was mixing in Arabia. So they're a mixed people. So, but that's the same spelling as Hebrew. It's just two words are transposed. And I've seen a lot of times in Genesis where there's strong connections between names that have just one letter difference. And this is kind of like I was talking about the chariots and the horses, that they mistake their progress with their providence. And so as they were developing mathematics and they're getting away from pictographic languages, they started writing letters and numbers in the same way and thinking there was a relationship between them that came after the formation of the letters, after the formation of the number system, that there was some kind of relationship intrinsic in them, like that God, again, with this, even though it's a Canaanite language, that somehow God's behind it, and that there's some deeper mystical power in there. And this has a lot to do with, I think, why they have so many letters in Arabic, because that they had certain meaning that they thought was important, and they didn't want to do away with them. This is true even for English. English was a new language. We don't need the C, the K, the Q, the X, and the Z, and the S, and everything else, when they all, you can make those same sounds with those few letters. You could probably drop one of them and still get away just fine. But they for whatever reason, they had thought that there was meaning beyond them, that they couldn't give them up because they saw certain differences, partly too because they don't have vowels. Hebrew's the same way. The original language doesn't have vowels. It's spoken with vowels, but there is a little bit of truth in Laquan Kadash that I think the vowels were more to differentiate words from each other. In most cases, they weren't necessary, but in certain cases, you wouldn't know the difference between two words that would have the same letters, but the tense a lot of times would be changed, or different things by the vowel. Maybe not the tense, but distinction. Like take the name Ibrahim in Arabic. When you put the Hamza, which is a little two looking shape, at the bottom of the aleph, it makes an E sound. And you put it at the top, it makes a ah sound. But they do the same with olives. Like that anytime you see a line above or on top, as well as one straight up and down, with the exception of a tilde, if it's got any kind of accent to it, those are all ah. But I is not an ah sound. Like Obed is translated with an O. In Hebrew, an E. I've even seen it with an I. Ayin. I. But so these words are very, very much the same. I mean, if you go to Google Translate, you can type in Hebrew, and they'll try to trip you up. They'll say a Brit, but they're not a Brit, because I'm talking about an adjective. So all of a sudden they think you mean a noun because you didn't specify, because they wouldn't try to give it to you wrong. So all of a sudden they give you a noun, they think you're talking about a person who's a Hebrew, and they try to type Hebrew man, and all of a sudden he's an Ish, the same name as Jesse, because Jesse was a mensch, But the word for mensch is how they feign for like Esau. they would say he's a Gabor. Gabor means like great. It means like Akbar. And I don't know if they're making fun of the Muslims that say Akbar, because Gabor is like the Hebrew equivalent. So they're just calling these people Gabor. So it reminds me of Genesis, what we were just reading, 33, where he's like feigning that he's a servant when he's planning to, take everything he has. But Hebrew doesn't mean that. So Arab and Hebrew. So you say Abri when like for a Hebrew man you'd say Ish Abri, and they would try to say it's different in Arabic because they would say it's different in Arabic because it ends in an aleph. But this particular aleph, when they don't put what I was talking about, that vertical line in there, it doesn't even make a ah sound at all. It makes an e sound. So you have abri and erib. It's a re re and a re be. A re be and a be re. And they're remarkably similar. There's hardly any difference in them at all. It seems like it's more a distinction that these groups made between themselves, or maybe was given onto them to create a little bit of demarcation, largely around the Dead Sea or something. But anything beyond there was considered, well beyond that. But you gotta understand that Paul went to Arabia. He didn't go to Jerusalem first. He went to Arabia. And he didn't say he was just like looking for, lost tribes or whatever, because like, Muhammad being from the Hashemite family, he was not from any lost tribes. He was not even part of Israel. But there was still the mixed multitude that went out and with Israel from Egypt. And Moses isn't even, I'm sorry, Muhammad is not claiming to be from those tribes. He's claiming he's from Ishmael. Ishmael didn't go to Egypt. So I'm not saying this is his narrative. But nonetheless, we have people who are not Israel, who are part of Israel, and they're going with them, and they're going through the desert, and this is what they do. They end up like being quite similar. And I think only now do we try to make these differences. Only now do we try to say, oh, it has something to do with some ancient feud between Isaac and Ishmael. When you call yourself a Christian, when this feud was used by Paul to talk about Israelites that persecute the church. But yet you'd let them control the narrative enough to say that, oh, these Palestinians, they just don't want you to live in their, to have your land back, when it was really not their land to begin with. It's just a matter of coincidence. that a bunch of people from Kazakhstan ended up adopting Judaism and now have become the vast majority of the religion. And this whole narrative of a 2,000-year-old man that, oh, we're an ancient people and our ancestors passed it on to us, and it's all a bill of goods. They haven't proved any of that. They want you to conflate. They're Israel, and it's just been one continuous thing. And this is what Paul even was even in the New Testament's in favor of it, as Michael Brown tries to tell you. That's not it at all. That's a fake history. So there wasn't, in the time of Hezekiah, there wasn't like a Hebrew language. You can look at the inscription. It had no religious leanings. I mean, even the Deuteronomical Code, the second law, is after the reforms of Josiah. There's all kinds of necromancy and chiromancy in the earliest form. And so it wasn't their religion, it wasn't their letters, it wasn't their numbering system, it wasn't any of these things that made Bronze Age Caspian people that successful. But if you look at the archaeology of the so-called Holy Land, that's what you find. You find Bronze Age Iranians as being the people of the book. Yeah, we the people of the book. And we the people of the book, y'all. We the people of the book. But these Bronze Age Iranians, they learned Semitic languages. If they might have been more inclined to Indo-European, and even when the Persians ruled the world, they let the Semitic languages of Aramaic continue on. So you don't have any loss there, even into the time of Herod the Great, the Semitic culture. And this goes well over through the Sea People. The Sea People were in that same culture between Arabia and Greece and Levant, and they're going to get influenced by that all. So, but when there's a critical mass, and these people were just so, I'd say dominant, I guess, when they left their wives back in the Danube and took wives from the area, so this whole idea that it comes from your mother is kind of ridiculous anyways, because the mothers weren't the people of the book. They were the people that were conquered by the people of the book or whatever. So it's kind of ridiculous in that regard. But yeah, these nomadic pastoralists ended up becoming sedentary in around the time of, let's say, Jeremiah. But the book of Isaiah will confuse you because it's set like 120 years prior, but has that same kind of sedentary, established structure. But they ended up losing it all, and it was kind of ridiculous to begin with anyways, to think that there was this kind of partial God that was going to live in a box. It reminds me of Aladdin. This is this genie in a bottle. This Yahweh in a box. And no, he wasn't an idol. He didn't take a form. You couldn't even see him. He put his hand over, and you'd only see his backside. And he didn't have a bun on the top of his head or anything. He was in blue. He was like the Word. Yeah, but he wasn't like the Word like Jesus. He was like the Word like a tablet, and he was in a box, and nobody could see him. And when Indiana Jones opened it, he had to close his eyes or he'd have turned to dust. This is this idea of Gabor, the genie. This is why Iblis didn't want to bow down to man, because man he thought lower than him, but he was a slave. The genie was a slave. So how are you going to tell the man that he's lower than you because he doesn't have the power you have? But he's free. And this, I think, was something Malik Yahweh didn't like either. Malik Yahweh, being the teacher of righteousness, the defender, the one that's always going to be partial and defend him, then it couldn't be. What I'm saying is if Malik Yahweh is going to be partial, then he's not going to. I don't even know. Like, it's almost like he was trying to set up his government on Earth, like through his Moshiach or something. He wanted to set up, his reign on Earth. So he had posted up in Bethel, and that didn't really work out. So they moved the box down to Jerusalem, and he was going to set up his kingdom all over the world and everything. But he couldn't. He always said, "Serve me, serve me, serve me. I'm so great." Just like the genie, he thought that people should just admire his greatness. He doesn't have any friends because he's got no equals. You should be jealous of how good looking he is and how strong he is and everything like that. He's got no rivals. He's all powerful. He's the genie, but he's not free. Malik, the angel of God, is subordinate. It can only serve man. God, he was set. That's why he was put in the garden to begin with. Because he was supposed to. All the animals were supposed to be under the dominion of man or whatever. So he didn't want to serve man or whatever. So he's going to conspire with man to take down heaven. So there's a war in heaven, and this is the formation of the Satan and everything. But the Satan was a messenger of light, so it's kind of confusing. You know what I mean? Like, and now even today you got. Paul said ministers of darkness masquerading as ministers of light or whatever. So, angels of light could be really angels of darkness or whatever. But they had set it up, and they had said, oh, this, if we succeed, then God's pleased with us. But then they didn't succeed. But then it was kind of like, well, we're doing the most in terms of trying to build God's kingdom. So therefore, we can make it happen. And then there was like 2.0. 2.0 was like the second temple, and it was bigger and better. They talk about how great Solomon was, but they can't prove none of that. This second temple was magnificent and maleficent and everything else. But um, one thing that wasn't maleficent about it was they tried to keep people out. They was Ezra was doing it from the jump. That's they didn't want anybody to defile their temple, and they thought, and this is how Arabs are like today. Arabs are very much insular, and they want to stick to their particular ways, their sunnah, their traditions, and they go way back. And the language is incredibly similar to Hebrew, as though they had a similar origin. And the Bible is not going to deny that. The Bible is going to tell them this whole Esau, Ishmael kind of story, which isn't really true because, one, Esau became part of Judea, so he's not even part of this whole, narrative to begin with. But you can't have Muslims in the Bible narrative. You can't have, as Dr. Brown says, blood on our hands. You can't have any of these things in the biblical narrative because they weren't in the Bible. All these things supposedly happen after the Bible, so they're going to have nothing to do with what the Bible says, regardless of what other people try to tell you. So Dr. Brown may be making a case, but he's definitely not making a biblical case. All his futurist teachings are his. That's him. That's Dr. Brown. It has a lot to do with what Dr. Brown's doing with his trips and vacations to the Holy Land, because he's going to contradict what Paul says. He's going to believe that there is, male and female and everything else, and he's going to ride that. And vocab's going to continue to ride this. And I don't know how her vocab. He's going to continue to ride this. It's okay to mock and say fool and all this kind of stuff, and just say the most divisive things, because a lot of his people are on his side and they're good sycophants, and it doesn't matter if he's mean or callous or rude or offensive, because he's talking about people that aren't you. And nobody's the canary in the coal mine except for who they say is, and nobody's going to be hung by the hangman, and you're going to be next, except if it's who they say it is. And injustice to some is a threat to justice against all, except for in certain cases. And because of 9/11s and 7/11 and a bunch of other racist tropes that people have. But somehow, when some guy comes on with a big black box on his forehead and a big beard and a desert shawl over his head, then that's very endearing to you. But if somebody had a kufi or something, you're all of a sudden offended. Because you got some weird sort of philo fetish, and it's part of Americanism. It's pretty deep. They teach you it in schools. It's in a lot of even evangelical circles as a reading of God's word, God's word. And because they believe that it is God's word, well, who wrote it? Well, they know who wrote it. Ezra wrote it. So, you put that two together, and they're saying Ezra's God. And this is what they was trying to tell you from the jump when they talk about, his son and the adoption. But they was trying to leave out a lot of people, because the problem goes all the way back to Adam. And, Abraham was a gent. So what they do, they just try to keep people out. And then here come their Messiah that's supposed to set it up to where everybody going to get it in, but under certain circumstances. Well, it wasn't like they were saying. It wasn't how they wanted it to be. And what they do is they take their law and they use it to kill his only son, God's only son. When they think God's trying to bless them and they're going to bless God, somehow blessing God gets completely missed. And the law that they said was holy and good is now used to kill God's son, the only one who was righteous before the law, when the whole point of the law was their righteousness. When they use it to do unrighteousness, it kind of defeats the purpose. And he was never for the law. John 1, he crushes the will of man to grace and every preconceived notion right off the jump. John 2, he crushes the temple. John 3, he crushes the idea of noble birth. John 4, he crushes the idea of Jerusalem. John 5, he crushes the idea of the Sabbath. John 6, he crushes the idea of the reigning Messiah. John 7, he crushes, I don't even know, I didn't think that far ahead, but no, the Gospel according to John is not for the law of Moses. It shows how the law of Moses, that was supposed to bring up the Messiah and lead all people, ended up destroying the Messiah and leading to nothing. And the only way it led to something was the people that it wasn't even for. He came for his own people. There was only one people that said his blood was going to save them. The blood of the lamb was going to save them at that time. I mean, it started with lots of people, but everybody else had given it up by then, but they was still hanging on. I mean, I guess Muslims still do too, but it's not really this atonement thing. But I'm a Christian, and I don't really believe in the atonement thing. I think that there was a certain atonement, but that was for the people that had the guilt complex, that felt like it was never good enough. He was trying to help them. He came for Israel. He came for his own. And there are a little bits of inklings of hints of other people who may get a little bit. You can talk about John 3. You can talk about Romans 3. There are little parts where you might see a verse that's like, oh, this is for all people. But it's only a little bit for all people. It's just the crumbs. You know, like the puppy at the table. You know, the children get fed. The children get the Eucharist. Judas was invited to the Last Supper. They get it. The puppies, the dogs, Caleb wasn't an Israelite, he's a Kenizzite. The puppies, the dogs, they get the crumbs that fall from the table. Well, the crumbs that fall from the table, those are already by the wayside. When a crumb fall, you don't pick it up and eat it because it probably picked up all kinds of hairs and germs and everything else. It's already gone. It's spilled milk in a sense. But people would go ahead and let their dog eat it. The dog would walk right up and just lick the floor. And when the dog licked the floor, he'd pick up that hair and that germ, and about 15 other things, as well as a few crumbs. And you ain't going to lambaste the dog. Like, what are you going to do? Eat that crumb? Like, you just let the dog have the crumb. It's like, if you're going to lick the ground just to get a little taste, well, have it then. You ain't mad. Yeah, it wasn't meant for that dog. Yeah, it was meant for the children. But the children are sloppy eaters. They didn't really want it. A lot of them, they didn't like the taste of it. They fed it to the dog when you wasn't looking because they didn't want it for themselves. They didn't like the taste. But, you know, the bread of life, you know, there were these little crumbs that was for all people, you know, but that wasn't really the point of it because most people didn't think they needed that kind of atonement. That yes, all people are guilty, but nobody was under this messianic complex to even think that they was, you know, the greatest things since sliced bread. You know, they were still humble or something, that they wasn't going to say, don't come into our temple because your dirty self, they was making money off the temple. Everybody's making money off the temple, and you ain't going to have a very successful state religion when you're keeping out as many people as possible. People are forcing their way in and forcing everybody else out with their elbows, and it's not really a pleasant place when, there's a finite room on the temple. You can make it bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't care if it's as big as the Middle East, like Ezekiel said. It's still not that great. I don't care if you got or the finest stones, invisible gold, so what? Like, I mean, so you can walk down and go, ooh la la. What's that gonna do for you? How's that help people? Oh, they was going to waste all that nard on Jesus. What a waste. A bunch of gold in the temple. That sounds like waste to me. What's that do? So it was all part of the trap to. They try to trap Jesus. Oh, just oh, why don't you just up and die, because you're making us all look bad and everything, and so they said, okay, yeah, that'll be good. We can set that up. Wasn't it Caiaphas said this would be good for the whole nation? You'll be the sacrifice, one man. This be where it's at. The one that desecrated our love and everything in our temple and stuff. Said he was going to destroy it. Said he was God. Yep, this guy. When really he was just doing perfect. He was just doing absolutely perfect in every stretch, every shape or form. And they say, oh yeah, this guy's guilty. When we get his blood on our hands, then things will start getting better for us. And they really hate him. I mean, the rest is history. You can go through and see why they hated him. I would go to John for that. Yeah. I'm a sign off here a bit, but I'm gonna go with my math my math lessons. I gotta get me a dry erase board. That's gonna be Monsieur Gentil teaches math. So you definitely want to tune into that. I'm gonna start it off with my love trigonometry, and it might change. Maybe a bunch of children. That would be nice. If you see me teaching up here and it's something true like math and a bunch of children are watching, just know that I'm happy. Just know that I'm doing what I want. Just know that I can't save nobody, but I worked hard and I'll continue to work hard to try to mentor and share with you anything I can. But I'm not no preacher, and pretty soon here I'm gonna start my teaching. You know, and when I'm doing maths, it can be something I know to be true. So there's that. I'm really happy about that. And I'm not saying the Bible ain't true, but I'm saying it's you can't it's not falsifiable. So it's not true and it's not true either. It's just belief. That's hard for a lot of people to get, but I don't know how to explain it. All right, that's the long and short of it. Until next time. I still got my dry erase board, so I might be making these kind of videos a couple more times until I get to it. Peace.